You guys are going to Florida, I hear. You guys go to Florida, that'd be really cool.
How long is it going to take?
I know. Well, it still has like engine on it, and it goes actually really fast.
Oh,
Especially when you put the sails and the engine.
so it's not really sailing.
What ship has, you said, sails and an engine?
Question is, what ship has both sails and an engine? They were talking about sailing, and a student asked what ship has both sails and an engine that you were sailing in, the ship you've been talking about.
Oh, that's the U.S. Coast Guard ship or cutter, Eagle. We actually send sailors there. We try to send sailors there once a summer to basically get more in-depth training on like square rig sailing and climbing up sails and furling sails and stuff like that.
And can you tell us anything about when the Eagle was built or how it came to be a Coast Guard cutter?
So cool story about it. It actually, before it was an American ship, it was actually a training ship for officers of Germany during the 40s, like for Nazis. And at the end of World War II, basically, obviously we won. We took that ship as kind of a prize ship, and then we gave it to the Coast Guard to train our officers and stuff, or the Coast Guard's officers.
Oh, like a reparations ship of a sort.
Basically, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool. They have like, not like a whole like museum on the Eagle, but like kind of like a whole like a room dedicated to like all the stuff that ship's been through, and it will show like
wow.
Yeah, Hitler was on that ship before. Kennedy was on that ship before. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. But now we use it as kind of a training vessel for Constitution sailors, Coast Guard guardsmen.
Is she wood hulled or metal hulled?
Metal.
Okay, because I was gonna be like a sailing ship. You think like wood, and I'm like, oh, if a ship like that from the 40s was still in decent shape, I would be like, whoa.
Yeah.
That's a good little ship.
Yeah, we gave it a new paint job and everything, but it has a lot of cool history.
Wow.
And so you were saying you spent a week sailing on it from New London to Philadelphia.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was quite the experience. We climb on the Constitution as well, but our ship, the masts, they just stay still because we're not actively sailing. Like, we're piered and we're moored to the pier, so everything pretty much just stays level. But on the Eagle, we're actually sailing, and it's not a big ship, so you can like feel the ship rocking back and forth, and climbing on like a mast that's going back and forth like this is pretty scary.
Oh my goodness.
At this
it
point,
hasn't got stabilizers, has it?
Yeah, I got really seasick the first day, but after, I was pretty, I wouldn't say fearless, but like I'm way more comfortable with climbing now.
Wow.
Yeesh. That's brave. I would not have the guts to do that.
Yeah, it was pretty scary.
Well, you guys have been like patiently waiting for us to join you for a while. So why don't we get started? If you want to introduce yourselves and tell us what you're doing. It's great to see you.
Yes, sir. Hello, everybody. I'm Airman Sawaya of the USS Constitution. Today, I'll be giving you a tour, or a special tour, actually. Shout out my cameraman, MC3 Kramer. He's probably one of the best PAOs out there. I got you.
Good morning, y'all.
But yeah, so I'm gonna give you guys a special tour. And first, we're gonna start out on the spar deck. So I'm gonna have you guys follow me.
And if people have questions, you can type them in because MC3 Kramer is a co-host, so he'll be able to read them too.
Just if you speak loudly enough, we can probably hear it. Just
okay, if you speak loudly, he'll be able to hear
just
you.
in case chat.
Yeah.
So welcome to the spar deck, everybody. This is basically where all the sailing operations that I was kind of just talking about, like on Constitution and the Eagle. This is basically where we get the ship to move. All of that is up here. We're a frigate, so we have 3 masts and 1 covered gun deck, and that is our class of ship, a frigate. So most aft here, or as we call in the Navy, or as you guys know, the back, we call it the aft. You have your mizzen mast, and this would have 3 different yards going all the way up, and sails connected to each, because you want to catch as much, wind power to kind of move the ship. She is pretty heavy. And then, of course, you got your main mast. Main mast is pretty important. This one has bigger sails, and not only that, right under it is where our quarterdeck actually is. And the quarterdeck is actually it's a big important part of the Navy. It's where our officer of the deck on any commissioned ship would be at, basically ringing on officers with this bell right here. Show you guys. So this bell would be used to ring on any officers or the captain, even Santa Claus. Anybody really of special importance would get rung aboard. And the officer of the deck, he also kind of keeps like deck logs and keeps record of what's happening around the ship or on the ship. And then go forward here. Then in the very fore part of the ship, we have our foremast. It's pretty fitting. Foremast is just like mizzen mast and the main mast, multiple sails on there, basically to get us to move forward. And also on the spar deck, we have these guns right here. These are our carronade cannons. They're basically 2,200-pound guns that shoot a 32-pound shot. They're not our best weapons that we have on the ship, but they do pack a lot of punch. We use them for pretty close range combat, which back then was a very common thing. It's not like Navy now where we have missiles that can, travel miles and miles. This, you had to get about 400 yards next to another ship to actually hit them. But like I said, they did pack a pretty big punch. Then come forward here. You guys can see up here, we have a few pennants and flags. And basically, in the U.S. Navy and in navies all around the world and just, maritime things in general, pennants and flags, they all symbolize something. They all mean something. So right now, we're flying those 3 muck pennants, and they're basically pennants, almost kind of like medals saying that, like, things we've accomplished, things we've done. Sometimes we fly a 3rd substitution flag, and that means our captain isn't around. He might be out golfing or fishing, with the family and dinner. Who knows? Who knows what captains do these days? And then in the very front right here, we have our Union Jack, and the Union Jack is basically just the star part of a U.S. flag. What it represents on our ship is basically the war on terrorism has ended on paper. And so we fly that. We used to fly the Jack, and that's the don't tread on me flag with the snake, but we did that in like times of war, but now we fly that. And then my favorite part of the spar deck that I'm going to tell you guys about right here. Through these nets is actually the head. And for any of you guys that know, the head is actually the restroom for the Navy. And so they would actually put down benches. We took them out basically for winter preservation and stuff. We don't want them getting messed up by, snow damage. But they would be right there. Benches with kind of just little holes in them. And basically sailors would just go in there, sit down on the bench, and just do their business in the front of the ship, which is kind of crazy because the front of the ships, they bounce a lot. So, a lot of water's, flying up, and it's almost like it's cleaning you at the same time you're soiling yourself. Sorry to put that image in your guys' head, but we're going to head down to the gun deck. Please follow me.
Question.
Yes.
Today, I'm assuming the Constitution is fitted with modern toilets, right?
Oh, so actually we don't have any restrooms on the ship nowadays. We act because, we can just walk off the ship and go to the head for the restroom.
Just wondering.
Thank goodness for that. But definitely if we do underways, we do a lot of underways during the summer where we actually get tugged out to Castle Island. We'll bring on porta potties because we'll have a lot of different people on the ship and we don't want anybody having to get off to go to the restroom. So we'll bring porta potties on here.
Oh, quite authentic then.
Yeah.
While he's going down below to the gun deck, I'll tell you that the turnaround cruises that occur in Boston Harbor were men only throughout most of the 1900s until the early 1970s when a female reporter snuck on board. And the argument of the Navy at the time was that they couldn't have women on board for these cruises because they lacked the facilities for them. And as the reporter herself said, I don't think I'll need to use facilities for a 2-hour cruise.
Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions before I start on the gun deck?
Any questions?
All right. Well, without further ado, I'm going to take it off the gun deck. So, welcome. I'm going to start from the fore of the ship to the very aft. Basically, just going over everything, kind of like what I love about the gun deck. To me, this is where the magic of the ship happens. This is where we've won all our battles. This is where we've won wars. This is where a lot of the shooting happens. It is called the gun deck. But it's not only strictly shooting. There's actually a lot of stuff that happens down here that goes unlooked because of all the big cannons and stuff. So up here, we actually have an anchor cable or an anchor chain now. We used to have an anchor cable basically just like rope, but then, you know, as the Navy progressed, we were like, let's use more sufficient ways of, you know, holding ourselves down basically. On the gun deck, we have a lot of guns, and a lot of people ask, why do they have names? Basically, sailors back then, a lot of them, they couldn't read or write. And so an easy way to help them know what gun they had to get to at times of, you know, battle stations, they would name them, they would personalize them for themselves because each gun had a gun crew attached to it. And so, you know, it'd be easier for them to know where Mad Anthony is, or Brimstone is, or, you know, we have tons of different names. Brother Jonathan, United Tars. Each of them had their own distinguished name. Watch my head down here. Right here is an important part of the gun deck too. So this might look like a dangerous, you know, weapon that the Navy might use to, you know, attack other people, but it's actually a caboose. And that's basically kind of where we would cook the food on the ship. Like I said, the gun deck's not specifically just for guns, but it's also where we have like open heat, open fires, and once a day, and basically cook one hot meal a day for the sailors. You know, we would eat things like salt junk, which is basically, I've eaten it. It's basically really bad beef jerky. That's the best way to explain it. It's very salty, salted beef. They would basically take 1 pound of beef and put 2 pounds salt on it. And yeah, they'll try to soak it off, but it's still very salty. And then over here, if you guys are on the ship, I tell you to watch your head. Right here, we actually have the steep tub. So this is where they would take that salt junk and they would put it in here and kind of soak off a lot of the salt on the beef. Basically, because you don't want to bite into super salty beef, but like I said, this stays pretty salty. And then right here, this is where a lot of the sailors, I would say this is probably one of their favorite places on the ship. This is the grog tub. The grog tub is basically, or what grog is basically a mixture of water, citrus fruits, and rum and whiskey, basically, to make their alcoholic beverage that they would get at least twice a day. But I'm sure, you know, some of them probably tipped the guy off who was watching the grog tub to get some more. But it's actually crazy to, like, within like Navy things now, sailors are kind of seen as like guys that like to drink. Well, that all started with the grog tub. So you know, with Navy terminology as well, a lot of things that we still use today, like bulkhead or deck, that all came from old, excuse me, that all came from old Navy, like terminology and stuff like that. That actually some of them started on this ship. And actually another one right here is the scuttlebutt. And the scuttlebutt is actually where they would store their water. And you'd have basically a guy tracking everybody's, you know, water taken, what they're getting out of it. And they would each get about a gallon of water a day. And basically that 1 gallon was either used for, you know, drinking or cleaning yourself. And the amount of work that sailors would do back then, you'd imagine a lot of them would probably just drink their water and just be pretty stinky. So I'm glad that the Navy, you know, basically teaches people to keep their hygiene, because that wouldn't be a fun smelling everybody's breath like how it was back then. Further right here we have bilge pumps. a lot of people on the ship, whenever we have visitors, will be like, do these shoot out cannonballs to help reloading easier? No, actually, these right here were actually used to keep water off the ship. So being a wooden ship, there's no way you can actually have, 100% watertight integrity. You're always going to have water leaking through somewhere, seeping through somewhere. But that's why they came with the idea of bilge pumps. And it's basically you're going to pump this and it would get water out from the orlop deck, push it out onto the decks right here on the gun deck, and they'll basically spread it out, get it off the ship. But they would use it kind of as a double-edged sword. You would want to keep these decks wet because in case of a battle, you're gonna have a lot of gunpowder and a lot of sparks and ashes up here, and you don't really want a dry deck and then a spark hits it with some gunpowder and then the whole gun deck's up in flames. So it served a kind of a dual purpose, I like to say.
Do those
and
pumps
right-
still work? Those-
We don't use them. We actually have more modern ways of bilge pumps, but I'm sure there is probably a way you could get them working again. And then right here we have the capstan. The capstan is pretty cool. It's basically what they would do. Do they have them right? Yeah. So basically, capstans, they're gonna get these. Bear with me. They get these right here, and they would put them in like so, and they're gonna walk around to basically raise or lower the anchor chain or the anchor cable, and they would have 80 men doing it at once because it was, some of these anchors are pretty heavy, like 800 pounds. Some of them, like our lightest ones, are pretty heavy. And they also, this is just the gun deck part of it, but they also have, the extension of it on the spar deck. All right, I'll put this back up. Not breaking anything. All right. From over here, we have our armament table. And basically, being in I like to say, like in the War of 1812, the amount of ships that we had in the U.S. Navy during the War of 1812, the British basically outnumbered us 1 to 10. It was 60 to 600. So a lot of the battles that we had, we weren't really trying to decimate our opponents. We weren't trying to sink their ships. At most times, we were trying to capture them and add them to our Navy. We wanted to build our Navy. We were kind of a young country. We wanted to build our economy, and the best way to do that was kind of defending the economy that we already had. And it'd be pretty hard when you go, 1 versus 10 ships. So these right here are different things that we'd actually shoot out of the guns, not to basically destroy another person's ship, but to stop them, like so they can't sail away or get away if we were trying to, capture them. So right here, we have the bar shot. And the bar shot would basically be shot, or we call it chain shot sometimes, would basically be shot at rigging. So you can tangle rigging so they won't be able to pull their lines, furl sails, pull sails up, pull them down, raise yards, things like that. And then you have your double-headed shot. And the double-headed shot would basically be shot out and it would spin and would actually crack masts or split masts. Because obviously if you lose a mast, you lose a lot of sail, you're not going to be able to go as fast. And then we have the star shot. This is my favorite one. This one you would actually shoot at a sail and it would spin, and right when it went through the sail, it would make a star-shaped hole within that sail. And like I said, if you can't sail, you might get captured. And then you have your canister shot and your grape shots. And your grape and canister shots are basically anti-personnel. I hate to say it, but they would just be used to shoot at other people. Because of course, if, you stop sailors from climbing up the rigging or, basically doing anything a part of their job on a ship, then that's going to kind of almost stop the ship's mission. And if you don't have men, you can't man anything. If you can't man anything, the ship operations stop. And then, of course, you have your round shots, your 32 and your 24 pound. And these were basically used to destroy the hull. These are the ones that most people see in movies, like Pirates of the Caribbean, where they're loading it and they all shoot out at once. But funny thing, in the movies, I always thought that was crazy. I always believed it. But like I said, Pirates of the Caribbean will show all the guns being shot at once. If you do that in real life, all these cannons right here are about 6,500 pounds, and they all jump back about 6 feet. So, you know, if you shoot them off and they all jump back at the same time, you might flip the entire ship over. So what we'd actually do is something called a rolling broadside, and we would go down the line one by one, as fast as we can in succession, but at the same time, not going all at once, because that's a lot of weight moving at the same time. Now we'll make our way into the captain's cabin. But before we go in, I just want to show you guys these plaques. These are plaques of all the fallen sailors, Marines, and officers that have passed away on board the ship or while connected to the ship, attached to the ship as service members. And it goes back spanning to the beginning of the ship to very recent times. And that's always here because, we like to remember those who have fought for us. Then coming here, this is the captain's cabin, of course. In the captain's cabin, like I said, the Constitution has a lot of guns. So even in the captain's cabin, we have them. It's pretty cool, the captain's cabin. We have, captain would have tables because captain needs to have, meetings with dignitaries or his officers or people that are in trouble. That would all happen within here. We also have these plaques right here. There's another one on the other side, but these plaques basically represent people who have been christened on the ship. So it's pretty cool. Constitution, some people ask to have their child christened on the ship. This is actually our christening bell. It was actually used as one of our bells for some time. And now its purpose is dedicated to that. And whenever people get christened on the ship, they'll actually get a plaque aboard, and they get to cherish that memory forever.
Excuse me, Airman, who does the christening? Is there like
sometimes it can be people on the ship. I know we've been asked sometimes. I actually knew a guy that used to be here. He did one, but most times they'll bring their own, priest or whoever they want to do it. Then coming here. So this is one of the captain's suites. It doesn't look like much, but compared to, regular sailor sleeping arrangements, this is actually really good. This is like top 5 stars type stuff. He actually has 2 rooms like this. Right now we are on the port side. This room right here, I like this room. This is the quarter gallery. Just looks like a reading room, like a room where you could just sit and get some light, but it actually is also the captain's head. So there'd, be straight shot down to the water down there, and captain would have his own private head. And right here, this is just another room for the captain. I always like to call this his living room. I'd imagine this is where he'd, talk to friends, bring on, family, loved ones. And this is kind of where they would lounge. And then here's another room, with another quarter gallery. It's just like the one on the port side, just on the starboard. And so this actually is an original to the this is an original to the ship when we launched, but it's still pretty historical. It's just the second different rendition of what we made from the beginning. All right, follow here. Now we're back out of the captain's cabin. Right here, it's pretty cool. We actually have a list of all the captains that have served aboard the ship, spanning from 1797 when we were launched to now with our new captain, John A. Benda, 76 in the command. Do you guys have any questions?
I was going to ask, could you talk a bit more about the incident in the War of 1812 and how the ship got its nickname?
Of course. I was actually about to get into that. So Constitution, as all you guys know, our name is Old Ironsides. Used to just be Ironsides. And so basically, where we got that from, you rewind long time ago. A lot of people like to say all this Basically, it all started in the War of 1812. But you got to go actually a little bit farther than that. Basically, where we started was the Revolutionary War, the birth of the country. So basically, in the beginning of this country, we had the Continental Navy, which it was the U.S. Navy, but it was kind of more like the people, the colonists of America, raising arms up against the British, as you guys know. But once the Revolutionary War was won, and once the British left, we basically kind of just nixed it, and we're like, all right, no one's gonna mess with us because we defeated the empire, and we're never gonna have to do anything again because everyone should be scared of us at this point. Obviously, throughout history, we know that's not how it went. Soon after the Revolutionary War, we had the Quasi War, which was a very short but important war with French privateers. They were basically attacking our merchant vessels, and we needed a way basically to defend them that time. And then we had the Barbary Wars with Tripoli, Algiers, Tunis, and Morocco. And basically, whenever we would try to trade, we'd have Barbary pirates, or corsairs as they're called. And they're basically pirates, but they work for a government, and they would just steal all our stuff. They would, come on board our ships and tax us. And still, we were like, we need a U.S. Navy. And so President George Washington actually signed the Naval Armament Act of 1794, which basically gave the U.S. Navy, or built the U.S. Navy that you know today, and also giving us $600,000 to make 6 frigates, just like this ship right here, to defend us from, French privateers, corsairs, and whoever else that wanted to try to obstruct our commerce. And so, funny thing, we should have used a financial advisor because Constitution alone costs like $300,000, about half of that payment that we got from the government. But as you can see, we're still here, so it was well worth it. We're actually the only ship still afloat that's still exactly pretty much the same as we were when we launched. A lot of them were captured or destroyed or just taken apart. I'd say one of them was actually taken apart and then built into another different kind of ship. But Constitution stayed true, and we're still here today, floating, still a commissioned warship. And so, after the Barbary Wars, now we're going to get into the War of 1812. Basically, the British kind of, I guess, wanted a rematch in the Revolutionary War. They started kind of telling us we couldn't trade with whoever we wanted. Them and the French were basically trying to say America can't trade with you guys can't trade with America. And America, of course, we're free. You guys can't tell us what to do. And also with that, they were impressing our sailors. And impressment is basically where you would go on someone else's ship and you would force the sailors on there to work for your navy or your ship. So pretty much be like if a British sailor came on here and just grabbed me and he's like, you're gonna go give tours on the HMS Victory. If you guys know the HMS Victory, that's actually the oldest commissioned warship, but they don't float. We float. Go America. But yeah, so they were impressing us, and they were trying to impede on our rights and stuff. So the War of 1812 broke out, and with this, Constitution was very fresh, out there. We haven't been in too many engagements, not any like real type of battles, and so we left Washington Navy Yard, and we're actually on the East Coast, just kind of making sure our merchant ships were okay, making sure British weren't trying to attack any of them. And one day, we're off the coast of, we're in Egg Harbor, New Jersey, and we seen 5 ships on the horizon. And Constitution at this point is a brand new ship. Our sailors are very motivated. We want to fight. We don't like that the British are trying to, do what they did, just recently with the Revolutionary War and trying to tell us what to do. So we're out there looking for pretty much a fight. And we see these 5 ships on the horizon, and they could be anybody. The ocean's a huge place. It could be the French, it could be British, it could be just our merchant ships. So we wanted to get a little bit closer to basically make sure, figure out who they were. And so we sailed kind of close to them, and to our surprise, it was the British. And they basically all raised their Union Jacks, signaling that they're British and they wanted to fight. Immediately after, they started shooting at us, and Constitution being a new ship with motivated sailors and the energy to fight, we turned around and actually started sailing back towards shore because we were like, we're not going to fight 1 against 5. That's completely not fair. So we actually started sailing back towards Massachusetts, back towards Boston, and we're being chased. But this is kind of a good and a bad thing. There was actually no wind, so we couldn't sail, and we had to find ways to basically get ourselves back to shore or back to Boston, but also avoid getting captured by these guys. And so these ways were kind of crazy. So first, we started throwing off all of our like water. We started throwing off food and stuff, which is crazy because you think the first thing you would throw off a ship to kind of make it lighter would be these heavy guns. But no, the captain thought throwing off water and food would be the best. And obviously it didn't do much. So we were like, okay, we need to figure out something else. So then we started actually dousing our sails. And that's basically where you throw water at fabric on sails to expand it, to try and catch as much wind as you possibly can. This didn't work at all, seeing as there's no wind. And then also, after running out of all these different ideas, we came up with the idea to do kedging. And kedging is basically where you're going to get your anchors and your kedging anchors, and you're going to put them on little rowboats in front of the ship, and you're going to row in front of the ship and basically drop one of them, and while the anchor's falling to the ocean floor, it would actually pull the ship forward. And so we just kept doing this back and forth, and this was actually working. But everything we were doing, the British were copying us to kind of stay right behind us. And so we're climbing away back to shore, and we do this for about 56 hours finally before the British stop chasing us. And so basically Constitution, we get back to Boston Harbor, and we feel defeated. We feel like we ran away. We feel like cowards. We wanted to fight. We want to destroy them. And obviously that's not what happened. But because of this, Captain Isaac Cole, the captain at the time, he knew he didn't want to go out like that as captain. He wanted to go back, and he wanted to make a name for this ship. And so about a month after the Great Escape, that's exactly what we did. We went back out. We went north up to Nova Scotia, Nova Scotia, Canada, because we heard that there were at least one of those British ships that chased us were going to be up there. And so we went up there, and it was a hot August day, and then we saw a ship on the horizon. It looked a lot like our ship. It could have been one of our sister ships. It could have been a merchant vessel. It could have been anybody. So we started going towards them. We started going at a pretty quick pace, and we wanted to basically figure out who they were. And so we raised our ensign, our United States flag, to show them that we were Americans. And almost right after that, they raised a British Union Jack. And then immediately they started firing at us, and we basically started yawing towards them. And that's basically when you start sailing in a zigzag pattern. And so they're shooting at us, but our captain, he actually tells us not to fire. So we're sailing towards them, and the closer we get, we can actually start feeling, the bulkheads, the walls, the whole shake of the ship. And the men are getting, frustrated because they think that their captain is just going to let them be destroyed. What's happening? Are we going to get to fight back at all, or is this man just going to have us be killed, basically? And so he waits and he waits and he waits, and they ask him over and over again. He just keeps saying, no, hold your fire. And we get about 25 yards away, and we can really feel it. We're getting hit from basically everywhere. They have small arms fire, riflemen shooting down on us. And throughout this, we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be sunk. So sailors actually sent to the spar deck to basically look over the side and see what's happening. Are we being breached? The hull being breached? What's happening? So a sailor sent up there, and he looks over the side, and he actually witnesses cannonballs being bounced off the side of the ship or being lodged in the side of the ship. None of them are actually penetrating the hull. And, he sees this, and he looks over, he sees it, and he says what will cement Constitution in American history forever. He says, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron." And he says this to everybody on the ship as loud as he can. And basically, everyone I'd like to imagine started saying, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron. We're iron sides." But you might have had that one like really pessimistic guy who was like, "We're still being shot at. Let's finish them." And so they went right back into fighting. But now they have this new built-up motivation. They believe that their ship is indestructible and they can't be destroyed. And so it's actually building them up as a crew. And we get about 25 yards away, and that's finally the time the captain gives the order to let off the first rolling broadside. He says, "Pour into her, boys." And then from the very front to the back, each gun goes off down the line, one rolling broadside. And with that one rolling broadside, we actually knocked down their foremast. Not their foremast, their mizzen mast. Sorry. And it's basically hanging over the side. And they start getting all frantic about it. And, because they just lost their mast, but we're hyped. We want to do it again. So then we try to basically go and sail in front of them. Well, imagine this hand's Guerriere, this hand's Constitution. We wanted to go up like this, get in front of them and shoot down the front of their ship, because the front and the back of these ships are basically the softest spots. So if you do that, you can get a lot of damage out of it. We tried it, but then the Guerriere crashed into the back of us. And so now there's all this commotion, this panic going on. Our ships are collided with each other. They're all tangled up. You got some of their sailors jumping on ours, some of ours trying to jump on theirs. And throughout all this madness, the commanding officer of the Marines on board, he actually steps up on the taffrail, he uncases his cutlass, and he asks Captain Isaac Hull, "Shall I board her, sir?" And before he can lead his Marines onto the ship, he's actually fatally wounded, and he falls to the decks of Constitution. And a testament to the bravery of the crew. Right after this, one of the sailors actually stepped up and tried to do something like that as well, and he was shot. And so the captain sees, his men basically dying, trying to board this ship, trying to stop it. And he knows that the Guerriere still has a lot of fight here. So what we'll do is we'll cut away from them. We'll cut all these rigging that's all connected, and we'll pull away from them and then hit them again with another rolling broadside. And so that's basically what we do. We cut away. When we pull away from them, we actually pull down their foremast. And when we pull down their foremast, the British pretty much at that point knew they've messed up. They're not going to be able to sail anywhere. And so Constitution, with pulling down this foremast, it actually pulls down the main mast as well, just a little bit after it, because all these masts, they're all connected. So, if you knock down one, these other two are going to take the weight of all that stuff that just fell down. And if you knock down another one, the other one's just going to fall with it. It's all connected. And so at this point, the Guerriere, the HMS Guerriere, is, sailless. They have no rigging. They have no masts up. They're pretty screwed. They're just like a floating boat, basically. And Constitution, we knew that they wanted to surrender because they shot a leeward shot away from the battle, basically signifying that they were done. They didn't want to fight us. And so Constitution sailors, we actually went up next to them. We sent out our boarding parties and our Marines to basically take on all their sailors that were still alive, and all their officers and their Marines. And we also sent on the boarding parties to try and see what we could take from their ship. But with all this, after that, we basically went down to their aft magazine, and we basically lit it ablaze, setting the entire ship on fire, basically sinking her to Davy Jones' locker. So the significance of all this, before this, the U.S. Navy didn't really have a name for itself. A lot of countries, a lot of different, the British Empire, a lot of these different countries, they saw us, we're brand new to the game. We can't fight. We won't be able to stay a country for long, and not even the Navy or, military for long. But after this happened, the British were like, these guys are actually pretty good at what they do. And throughout the War of 1812, that kept happening. We had 2 other battles in the War of 1812. And each one, we got better and better. And, the U.S. Navy at that time is what the U.S. Navy is today. A lot of things that they used to do back then, we do it today, just in a more modernized fashion. And, it's pretty cool to think to be on like a ship like this where all that started. But that's how we became Ironsides. And now we're called Old Ironsides because we're 223 years old. But do you guys have any questions? Or
So I have a
Thank-
small
thank you.
question on the
Yes, Sean.
Ironsides. So in all of its battles, it took absolutely no damage at all.
oh, we took a lot of damage. Believe me, we took a lot of damage. But the thing is, even with taking a lot of damage, like for example, our battle with the HMS Java, that was probably one of our darkest days. That might have been a battle we were really supposed to lose. But the difference between us and the Java is that we didn't give up. Like we had our wheel knocked off by cannon fire. Our hull was being actually breached. Our spars were getting all messed up. Our rigging was getting all tangled. And, sailors at this point, most of them you would think would stop after seeing, a lot of their fellow sailors, fellow Marines dying. But we just kept going. And it's actually said that after the Java battle, when we brought on their captain, or their second in command, their captain was actually fatally wounded. We brought on their second in command, and he told our captain, had we stopped even a little bit, he thought they could destroy us, which of course didn't happen. So, but anything else? Any other questions or?
I guess I can build off mine a little bit more. You said that the wheel of the ship got blasted off. So how would they go
Yeah.
about fixing that?
Basically, they blew it off, and we had no way of steering, of course, and we were kind of panicking during that. And so what we did, a sailor actually came aboard. It might have been Captain Bainbridge that came up with the great idea of basically going down to the tiller room, which I'll show you guys when we go to the berth deck. It's basically a room where the helm or the wheel of the ship is connected to, so you can steer the rudder and basically steer the ship. And we're actually using that to move. It's pretty cool. And we had to play kind of like a deadly game of telephone. We had to give orders of which way to steer from the spar deck all the way to the berth deck through the commotion of battle. But like I said, since we're still here, I guess we did it the right way.
And didn't they take the wheel from the Java and put it on Constitution? Or is
Yes,
that a myth?
I believe we did. Yeah, that's what we did. And we kind of just repaired it and then got us back home to repair the rest of the ship.
Same with Gary Earsbell.
Yeah, we took Garrier's bell. We always take stuff off other ships we defeat.
Is it the
But,
same wheel? Like the Javas?
Oh, no, it's not the same one. I'm sure they took it off and probably put it in a museum somewhere, but now most of the stuff is renovated. A lot of it has actually been renovated. The ship, the percentage of original parts on the ship is about 15%. And a lot of people will look down on this like, oh, it's not the same Constitution, but actually it is. At 1797, they basically, when we were launched, they basically gave us about 30 years before the wood started to rot on the ship. So we've actually been doing repairs on the ship since the beginning, and that's why they like to say that it's the same ship. The original parts of the ship are the keel, which is basically the backbone, and everything that's connected to that, like the ribs of the ship. But everything above that is basically remodeled, renovated, rebuilt because wood rots. We don't want it to rot, and then that will be the downfall of the ship. But if you guys don't have any other further questions,
Thank you. Ray, did you have a question?
oh yep,
I thought Ray was asking a question. No.
No, I unmuted myself by mistake.
Oh, okay.
well, without further ado, I've told you guys why we are named Old Ironsides. But I like to always remind people it's not the ship that was made of iron, but it was the men that were made of iron. And now I will show you where those men of iron actually used to live and stay. Oh, ow. And as you go down, it gets lower and lower. So if you guys were here, I would tell you to watch your head. So welcome to the birth deck. This is where they would sleep. This is where they would eat. This is where most time at sea would be spent. So that's why I'm kind of ducked down. Feel bad for my cameraman here. He's a little bit taller than me, and he has to really like duck. Right here, I'll go over sleep arrangements for the sailors and the Marines and the officers. So very four, at the very front, you would have your sick bay. And your sick bay is where you would keep, anyone who's been wounded in battle, anyone who's sick of, scurvy or night blindness, any kind of disease or, sickness that they might have. They would quarantine them in the very front of the ship, basically, keep them from getting everybody else sick. Also, some of the wounds that men would have from some of these battles are like splintering. A lot of people would think that, a cannonball would come through the side of the hole and hit a guy in the leg, but it was actually what would happen. It would hit the side, and then splinters, really big splinters, would fly out, hit sailors, hit Marines. So that was what a lot of the men, that was a lot of their injuries in the front. But right behind them, about right here in this area, you would have your enlisted sailors, and your enlisted sailors would basically be sleeping. The most experienced, the most high ranking, they would be towards the outsides because they have more experience, so they would get better accommodations. I'm gonna show you guys. They would get better accommodations like this right here. This is basically a porthole. It works as like a window for light air. Seeing as you had about 250 to 300 people down here at one time, so it would probably be really stinky, really hot, really bad. So you would want to be close to these things to get some fresh air. But towards the middle, all the new sailors like myself would be kind of in the middle. And the least experienced would be in the middle too, to kind of combat seasickness because it wouldn't sway as much in the middle. But you guys got to imagine that there'd probably be about 300 hammocks, just like these ones right here, going all the way from the front to the back of the ship. And then right here, in the middle, you would have your Marines. You'd have about 50 to 55 Marines on board the ship. And they would basically be right here. Marines, their job on the ship was basically to be boarding parties. They were snipers. They also worked as security for the ship. They made sure that, the enlisted men didn't riot or raise arms against the officers. Because you would split officers enlisted because you didn't want the man who was controlling how much you ate laying next to all the guys. Like, you don't want the boss hanging out with the workers, basically. Because, one day an officer gets mad at a sailor and then he tells him he can't have any water. That sailor's going to be pretty mad. And you don't want these two to be in the same area. So they used the Marines to defend that, to make sure that there was no insurrection within the ranks. And then, right here, right outside the wardroom, you would have your midshipmen. And midshipmen were basically officers in training. Basically, all their job was on the ship was to learn the ropes, literally learn the ropes from the captain, the XO, the lieutenants, the warrant officers. And they would be sleeping right here, like I said, taking training, basically just learning everything they could because one day they would be the future of the Navy. And coming here, this is the wardroom. The wardroom is where our 1st through 5 lieutenants would sleep. This is where our warrant officers would sleep. You had people like the surgeon would sleep in here, the purser, your boatswains, anyone who had any professional knowledge, they would be in here. Also with the officers like lieutenants and things like that, and the Marine officers as well. They would be in here, and they would have better sleeping arrangements because they had more knowledge and they meant more to the ship. So I'm gonna show you guys some of these suites that they got. They got their own rooms, and they had better hammocks, bigger hammocks, and they had like space to read, their own chairs, just their own little private spaces, just because, they're most of them were older, and most of them were educated. A lot of the ship, like I said, wasn't educated at all. So you would kind of put all the smarter guys here to make all the plans and stuff. Whether because you don't want them to be out there kind of mixed with the rugged guys, as I like to say.
Airman Soyev, there's a
Yes.
there's a partition between this area and the rest. Was there a partition between the midshipmen and the Marines, or was that all open on the berth deck? You know?
There was, but we actually took it down. Same way with the sick bay, we had like a bulkhead there to split them, to basically split them. But we took it down now because we have like open deck tours and stuff, and we want to be able to see down the whole decks just in case anything bad happens.
Thank you.
But yep, and then before I go on here, these right here you'll see all over the ship. These are fire buckets, and not fire buckets like there's fire in them, but like basically you have a mixture of water and sand. And so if you ever had an open flame, or fire happening in the ship, this would work as like the water hose. You get it and you would just splash it onto the smoke or the sparks or anything that you would think could start a fire, and it would put it out immediately. And the sand was actually used for a good reason too. With the sand and the water on the floor, the sand would help you not slip. Kind of the same way how we put salt on ice and snow now, and it helps you kind of get a grip on like what you're walking on. Works the same way. And then we were talking about the tiller room on the gun deck. This is actually the tiller room. This is where we basically, these lines would actually be pulled so we can basically steer the rudder. And we take it right over here. Right here is our aft magazine. And so, cool thing about our aft magazine, that's actually where we store all of our gunpowder, anything explosive, anything we didn't want to be in the hands of any other sailors or Marines. We would store it down there, and we would actually have someone watch it, make sure or take record of everything that goes in and comes out. And the design of it is really cool because on the berth deck right now, the water line out, on the outside of the ship is actually where my feet is at. So the aft magazine is actually below the water. And the reason for this is because you don't want a hot round to come through the hole and then, hit a bag of gunpowder and then the whole ship goes up in flames. So they would put it underwater because nobody aims at the water, if that makes sense. And we'll take it out here.
How would they get the gunpowder from down there up to the gun deck?
Good question. So we actually had, what are they called? Powder monkeys. And they're basically young boys. Young is like 8 years old, would be on this ship working. And we would send them to go down and grab it and then basically run up and take it to the gun deck. And cool story, we actually had a kid, he was 8 years old. His name was David Tobias. He was from the north end of Boston. And he worked as one of those powder monkeys. In the museum, we still have history about him today. Take it here now. Oh, before we go, this is just a list of all the first lieutenants of the USS Constitution. Now they're known as the XO, the executive officer. Basically the right-hand man, the commanding officer. Now, I'll take you guys to the forelock deck. It's the lowest part of the entire ship. Believe me, it gets lower and lower as you go down. So this is the surgeon's cockpit. So here, this is the area where basically, if the surgeon needs surgeries, it will be in this room because this is the most aft of the ship and the lowest part of the ship. So they would basically take them here because, of course, a surgeon's going to need a steady hand. You don't want to take them, to the spar deck where it rocks a lot, or to the front of the ship where it rocks a lot. You would take them here, and it wouldn't move that much, and it would help the surgeon, make his decisions. we're going to take it here. Right now, we're walking on the cable tier. Basic tier is where we would lay. It'll be laid out down there where we're just walking on. Basically, to dry out the cable because, like I said, it used to be basically just rope, and we would need to dry it out because you don't want, after leaving it in the water for a while, it's going to get a lot of like ocean life on it. And you don't want that to get kind of messed up from anything like that. So you would dry it out and it would just be laying right there. Our anchor chain is actually in here. Here, please show them that too. Our anchor chain is just in here. The anchor chain, the reason we use the anchor chain is because of that reason. It's less, we don't have to fix it as much as a cable line. That, you know, with metal, it will kind of just fix itself for us.
So it would just be lowered through those hatchways down to the orlop deck.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so it would go down through these hose pipes. They're basically, like you said, just holes within the decks that would go all the way down, raised and lowered with the capstan. Take it to the front. So the cool thing about Constitution, from the very beginning, we've always had basically people to make sure that this area of the ship is checked, because if you don't check it every once in a while, it might leak and you don't catch it as soon as it could. You don't, down here, there's a lot of things that we would store. Back then we would store food and like our preservatives down here. Basically, and we would have one man basically make sure no one's stealing from it. And so now, like I said, a lot of the things that the Navy did back then, we still do today. And so we actually have what we call sounding and security, and it's basically a watch standing position, just like the officer of the deck. And they will rove this area of the ship to make sure there's no leaks, make sure there's no fires, make sure the ship stays old forever. Then back here, this is the sail loft. This is where we store a lot of the things that we use today for our operations. Like I said, we climb. Sometimes we have to do preservation work, so we have like hard hats and stuff like that. We have a lot of brooms because the Navy loves to clean. A lot of brooms. And trust me, this isn't all of our brooms. There's like way more than this. And then same with like rags and stuff, because there's a lot of brass on the ship that we like to shine. But like I said, a lot of the stuff that the Navy did way back then, we do it now just with a modern twist to it. We found better ways of doing it. But you know, throughout all these stories that I've told you guys and all this like Constitution knowledge, a lot of people will come on the ship and, you know, they think of like Pirates of the Caribbean, or they think of like you know, just old sailor movies, but they forget that this ship is like, it's been here since the beginning of the country. This ship, it's like an honor to be serving aboard this ship because so many different people have came through here. Even President Kennedy as a child used to come here and just learn about, like, you know, all parts of the ship, learn about the guns. And so the ship, it has like a very huge history, and it's like pretty cool to be a part of that. And, you know, whether it's the War of 1812, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, or the wars that happened today or recent times, since the beginning, men, women, and even children have been serving to keep, you know, freedoms and liberties that this country has had. And I just think that's an awesome thing. But do you guys have any other questions?
Where are you in relation to the powder magazine? Is that?
So right now, the aft magazine would be all the way down there. But as like I said, that's the aft magazine.
Yeah.
We're in the front of the ship. The front of the ship actually has a forward magazine, and that's these right here. So it serves the same purpose as the aft magazine, but just in the front of the ship. So you would also have people go down there, get cannons, get gunpowder, and run it up. But we never go down there anymore because it's like lead line and it's pretty dangerous. So you don't want to get lead poisoning. So we kind of stay out of these.
Where would the water be stored?
The water, so the water like would be stored down here with all the food and like preservatives and stuff. And you know, like I said, you'd only get 1 gallon of water, but some people would try to get more. So you would always have guards down here to make sure that none of that gets taken when it's not supposed to.
Thank you.
Did the Constitution have like a brig or anything for like prisoners of like war or like people who surrendered in battle?
We never had a brig, but what we did whenever so after a battle, we would take on a lot of their people, but we would basically give them an ultimatum where we would say like act right or we're just gonna leave you in the ocean. Basically, so they would be like, okay, well, we won't, you know, try to do anything, we'll just come on board your ship. We would take them on, but whenever, you know, people would act up on the ship or do something wrong, like stealing or, you know, fighting, we'd actually chain them to the guns. We would just basically handcuff them to the guns, and they would just have to serve their sentence out there. And anything else?
So just I'm thinking about, you know, guys who got too drunk or assassinated an officer or other things like that. They would just be chained to a gun somewhere.
That was the least amount of punishment you could get. We did a lot of things back then. The Old Navy, like they used to do flogging. Sometimes you would get tied to the waist on the spar deck, and they would give you like 50 lashings. I'm not sure if they did this on the ship, but they also had this punishment called keel hauling, which sounds terrifying. And they basically just throw you over the side of the ship, and they would use like a line and a messenger line to pull you under the ship. And you basically would get like scraped against all the barnacles on the underside of the ship. And if you made it out the other side, that you would have served like your sentence.
Wow.
But most people would, I imagine, wouldn't survive something like that. You guys have any other questions?
Yeah, Bob, on the punishment, I'll add in that you know, everyone always talks about keel hauling, and it's like the great story. But no historian's been able to find any evidence that it was done in the U.S. Navy ever. And it was far less common than the mythology of it being in the Royal Navy. What we do see in the Constitution's logbooks was crew who were had been, you know, disobedient, being put out in longboats for the night, particularly when the ship was at anchor. And so when Bainbridge replaced Hull, you know, the crew was not happy at all, given Bainbridge's reputation. And over the course of 3 nights, a number of the crew were essentially exiled to the longboats that were being, you know, out on a line behind the ship.
Yeah. They had many different ways of punishing people way back then. But they did make basically an act that kind of stopped that. And that's kind of why the Navy, we do different things of punishment now. Thank goodness they don't whip anybody anymore, or they don't flog anybody anymore. We have things like captain's masks, or
Mostly administrative.
they take half month's pay, administrative punishment. And that, sometimes I'd be thinking that stuff might be worse.
Yeah.
But better than getting beat.
Yeah. You guys aren't doing this because you're being punished, I'm hoping. Someone's asking if people kept diaries or journals aboard the ship, and what would they write with? And
Yeah, all the time. A lot of people, a lot of sailors, and especially a lot of the officers definitely would basically write their stories. And that's how today we still have a lot of knowledge about what happened aboard these ships way back then. We also had deck logs. Like I said, that's still a thing that we do today. Basically recording everything that happened, even like during battle, they would keep a record of what's happening on the deck log. And that's still today how we can go back and figure out what was happening, exactly what was happening back then.
And I've just been doing some reading about the World Cruise, and I know that a couple of the lieutenants kept journals and a couple of the midshipmen. And it seemed like for the midshipmen, it was almost an exercise. The captain would read it every week, every month, and comment on what they were writing. Kind of, it is really a way of recording where you've been and what you've seen. The log does tell you every day with the position of the ship and anything unusual, but then these journals tell you a lot more about life aboard the ship or in the ports that they visit. And
Right.
they would actually have books that they would purchase that they then could write in.
Yeah, a lot of the journals and like diaries, they would be. It's perfect that they would write them because it would give us a more personal account of what would happen aboard the ship. Whereas deck logs are more of like they're more of like the information side of things, like how we were sailing, where we were sailing, at what time of the day when this happened, or lunch happened. If there was a captain's mast, which is basically just like a punishment board, they would write all that stuff down. But like you say, it's journals and diaries really help us to know how sailors felt back then.
A couple of the crew also kept letter books where the letters that they mailed off, they maintained copies of them, for themselves. Pardon Monty Whipple, one of the midshipmen we have a letter book of that's really insightful. The midshipmen's journals, I tell you, were duplicates almost verbatim of the logbook, because you're right, Bob, that was an exercise they had to do to learn how to do it. But it's been, for us as historians, it's been incredibly valuable to have all those midshipmen's logs, because there are some cases where the original deck logs have gone missing or not survived. And to have these other, virtually identical accounts helps us to fill in those holes.
Exactly.
You guys can find all of these kinds of materials too on the museum website. All of the journals and logbooks, midshipmen's logs that we have, a lot of them have been completely scanned and are available on the museum. And not during 1812, but in the 1930s, when Constitution was on her national cruise around the country after a massive restoration, there were a number of young active duty Navy sailors on board for that as well too. And a number of them kept scrapbooks that included photographs and souvenirs. And I think we have at the Constitution Museum about 4 or 5 of those that have been donated to us by descendants and family members. And you can view those on the museum website as well too. And they're really cool. They're pictures of the ship being towed through like the Panama Canal and around all the port visits they did in the early 1930s.
Yep. But you guys have any other questions for me?
Any other questions for Airman Sawaya? This has been great. Thank you very much for spending the time with us this morning. And
It's always a pleasure, an honor.
Thank you for sharing this story of the Navy, and thank you for being part of the Navy. You and MC3 Kramer, thank you for photographing this.
Of course.
And recording this moment.
My pleasure.
Great. So thanks. So the class will take a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back, and Carl and I will be talking about how to build the ship. So thank you very much for joining us. And
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Happy
day.
Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you. always interesting. I mean, how many times have you had the tour of a ship, Bob?
Your audio is popping in and
Yeah.
out, Bob.
Yeah,
Hey, there
that's
you
what
are.
it was.
Okay. How many tours of the ship have you had in your career?
How many tours have I been on?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I have no idea.
yeah. There's always something different, though. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
interesting to see the.
Yeah, in addition to, I have no idea. We're always sitting in on them.
Yeah.
Before COVID hit, one of the roles of the museum, as you know, Bob, is providing historical education to the active duty crew who are providing the public tours. So as part of that, we in the past have done classes with them on presenting things to the public, on various topics, detailed stuff. The crew, the Navy crew, come often from boot camp directly on. This is their first deployment, or if they're coming back from the fleet, either way. Like the one thing they probably don't have a lot of previous experience doing is public presentations, right? Or really any kind of in-depth naval history. And so the museum, for its entire lifespan back to the 1970s, has made one of its tasks providing that sort of training and education. That's come to a stop during the COVID period. But one of the things we at the museum have been doing, trying to do, was attending the crew's daily video tours of the ship. And so that then in the chat, we can provide people additional sources for additional information, because the crew can't always answer all of the questions. Either they may not have the answer, or they just don't have the time to get to everybody. And so we made it our rule for the first half of COVID, when they were doing a lot of daily tours, to be sitting in on those and helping to direct people to additional resources or answer questions that crew couldn't get to.
Right. Yeah. Good.
But you're right. Every crew member has a different background. They come from a different, setting, and they have different things they're interested in.
Oh yeah.
It is interesting, sometimes mythology spreads among the crew as they, are training for this. And so you'll hear some stories popping up again, again and again, and sort of shifting with time, and that organic game of telephone tag that goes on. I can tell you, having heard tours from crew members who have come back from other deployments or had specialized careers in the Navy, that it can be really fascinating. One of the Seabees, which is slang for the construction battalions, the engineers of the Navy who, go ashore and build stuff. Having them do tours can be really fascinating. There was a member of the crew, I don't know if she's still on board, she may have moved on, who did this amazing tour from the Seabees perspective of the construction aspects, and what went into different parts and why you would use them that way, and what physical what they added to the actual construction of the ship and why they were necessary. It's kind of cool.
It is, yes.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes, Mike.
So with the ship, like let's say it's, like we're seeing a lot of snow coming down right now. And what was the ventilation like on the ship? Because I know they said that they kept the food and the water down, I guess, in the hull of the boat, which kind of, I guess, kept everything fresh. But isn't that also where people slept?
No, people slept on the berthing deck, which was above the orlop deck where the food was. So, where people sleep, there is some ventilation. He pointed to the little holes in the side, the ventilation shafts on the berth deck, But so there is some ventilation there, but really none down on the orlop deck where things were stored. Although, before the class, I was talking with the sailors, because they were saying on a day like this, the snow comes down on a rainy day, the snow is going to come down from one deck to the next deck and down into the hull. So there and also they have these kind of scuppers on the decks, the above decks, to let water out. But water is going to come down, as well as water is going to come up through the hull. So they do have pumps to, keep the bilge going, Carl can probably talk more intelligently about this than I can, but the ship still does have this, it still leaks because it's a wooden ship, and you can't keep water out of a wooden ship. I don't know if this answers your question, Mike, or it's, the crew doesn't sleep where the food is stored, and then there's also a spirit room down there that they would periodically open up to ventilate, but they would always have to keep a guard over it because, of course, you have the open room with the spirits, and it would be tempting.
Yeah, all the food stored, we're calling it the orlop deck, but it's really down in the hold. It's the absolute lowest part of the hull. And you want that because of the weight is helping to contribute to the stability of the vessel. Remember, you're putting all these super heavy guns up on top, and you're going to end up with this, top heavy boat that's going to tip over. Someone asked about water and stored. I think Bob asked about water in the hold. Water was stored in huge casks that were literally built in place in the hold. And the casks range, casks could range in size from the tiniest little thing that you could carry with you all the way up to these giant water casks. And every one of them has a different name. If you look up names for casks and barrels, it's from firkins up to tons. And a ton, TUN, was actually the name of this humongous barrel that gives its name to the fact that it literally could hold a ton of water. And you were looking at initial deployment of about 47,000 gallons of water going into these casks in the hold. And then each day with smaller barrels, you would drop them down and fill up and bring them up. If you notice, all of the cross hatching over the hatches, allows that ventilation when the weather's good. But the term batten down the hatches, which you may have heard before, is sort of a nautical term to, get ready for stormy weather, meant that more solid wooden tops were put down over those openings, and battens, skinny pieces of wood, were literally banged in between them to keep them watertight, and then the entire thing covered over in a waterproofed canvas. That every effort was made like that to keep water from coming down from the top down into it and flooding the boat from the down flooding from top to bottom. But yeah, as Bob said, every wooden boat, because it's made up of a million small individual pieces, is always sort of, in a state of partial sinking. The old joke is, if it's creaking, it's leaking, right? So if you hear that creaking of a wooden vessel, it's those parts rubbing together. And if they're moving, it means they're probably letting in water as well, too. So to prevent that, you were caulking, securing the spaces between all of those planks, both on the deck and in the hull, with a variety of different materials, stretches of cotton and oakum, a more dense kind of thing, and then layering over it with waterproof, other waterproof materials. You would also, on the deck, be washing it down every day, not just for cleanliness, but because soaking those wooden planks swells them up, especially with salt water, which sort of pickles them and prevents the rot at the same time. But it swells up the wood, and as it swells, it tightens up those joints between planks, which prevents more additional water from seeping down. It's probably a longer answer than you need.
Well, that's good, because we were going to talk today then about building a wooden ship and what you need to put this together. I mean, we've just had this really good tour of this ship, the different levels of it, and you just see how much stuff there is going into this. So, and so let's talk a bit about what you need to build something like this. So what's the first thing?
A crew.
A crew. Okay, Mike. Thank you, Mike. You need a crew, or you need
A crew to man it or a crew to build it?
Crew to build it.
Yeah, you do. So how big of a crew do you think? And I see it.
Thinking 30.
Okay. Well, what would you need these people to do? And what is it? What are the skills you would need, or what are the things you need people to do in order to build a ship?
You would need a variety of sorts of people.
Okay.
You would need shipbuilders, you would need joiners, you would need architects, you would need so many different kinds of people. I don't know exactly what kind of other specialized professions you would need for a wooden ship. The knowledge I'm giving is mostly I've got for steel ships, but
Well, yeah.
those are the basics, I think.
Yeah. You're right. An architect might be the first one you would need, someone to design it. Then you could figure out what else, what other skills you need.
Oh, a draftsman. You would need draftsmen.
Okay, and the Navy had a lot of draftsmen, and very important. And because I was just reading this morning that up until fairly recently, all of the plans were all done by hand, and their various refittings of the Constitution were all drafted by hand. You need really careful drafting in order to do that. So yeah, so we haven't even gotten out of the office yet, and we're talking about building a ship, which is, so you do need, good plan. You need an architect, you need good plans, which is good. And then you mentioned what is a guy, Ray, can you tell the rest of us what a joiner is, or what a joiner does?
Basically, a joiner is somebody whose specialty is putting things together, and for wooden ships, that was critical. For any ship, really.
Yeah.
But for the wooden ones especially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Anyone else can have any thoughts on building a ship?
Would it take, like, depending on how long you had to build it, like depending on what the timetable was? I know this just like seems to common sense, but would you need more people if you wanted it to be built faster, like more like manpower, and then like less people if you had more time to build it? Like, would the size of the crew depend on your timetable?
I would imagine. And Carl probably knows. I know of a surprising number of guys who decide to build a ship or a vessel, and they're doing it in their yard, and some of them might actually be finished, but it's a hobby that, so it depends on how much time you have, and whether it's fast or slow.
So then the question is, Megan, it's partly a question of how quickly you want it built, but then the corollary to that is how much money have you got, and how quickly do you have it? And even if you have all the money in the world and you want it done overnight, can you find that many skilled people in one place? And if not, where are they going to come from? And so these are sort of the questions that drove some elements of design and shipbuilding for these original 6 frigates.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason that that each of these original frigates were set up to be built in a different city was exactly this, that they didn't believe that there was enough resources or personnel available in any one city to do all of this.
I was just in one of the documents I sent you this morning. It's the letter from Humphreys, the ship designer, to the I believe it was to the Secretary of War. And he talks about where the ships are going to be built. He says, upon inquiry, it appears improbable that a contract could be formed with the shipbuilders in this place, that is Philadelphia, for the one directed to be built here. They allege that if a contract was offered and accepted by 2 or more, that is, this is a big project, so maybe they'll hire 2 of the shipbuilders in Philadelphia to do it, it would excite the ill will and envy of those who had no part in it. And as the frigate would require many hands, the price of that sort of labor would rise. And that therefore it would be in the power of those not employed, that is the ship builders who did not get the contract, to raise the wages of the journeyman a shilling or two per day, which would occasion great embarrassment. So you do have a place like Philadelphia or Boston where there are shipbuilders, and it would be in their interest to get the contract to build this. But then if you're not the guy who gets the contract, you're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to raise the wages of mine. So then it's going to cost you more to build the ship. Hence, it would appear to follow as a consequence that if the shipbuilders of Philadelphia, some of whom have considerable capital, would decline a contract, it would be almost impractical to obtain the building by contract elsewhere. It's a difficult thing. And then yes, Megan.
Oh, no, sorry. No, I was just responding to say.
Okay. Yeah. So it's, you need to hire guys, but then hiring them implies you have to pay them. And they're not going to be doing this out of their patriotic duty. Later on in the 1790s, the merchants of Philadelphia did get together and built a frigate to give to the United States, actually the frigate Philadelphia, that has an unfortunate ending in Tripoli. But it's an expensive undertaking. And, and we know the government's going to make a contract to do this, and government money is not to be, I'll say no more, but that's, so again, it's a more complicated than simply a group of us saying, hey, let's go build a ship, which would be a very complicated thing underway. So we have the idea for the ships, and so we've decided the first thing we need are people, but then what about some of the materials that we might need? What would be the most important of the materials we would need, considering we've managed to hire a crew to build it, an architect, draftsman, the other characters?
Wood.
Yeah, wood.
Okay. Good. And what kind of wood?
Strong wood.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Strong wood. Any particular, do you know much, does anyone know much about wood?
Would oak be good?
Oak, okay, why would you say oak, Sean?
I'm just thinking it's a little common to the Americas, and it's a bit of a sturdier wood.
Yeah. Now, another thing to think about, though, when you're thinking about wood, and I agree, it is common to the Americas and it's strong. Wood has a certain density and a weight to it. And so some wood floats and some wood doesn't. And so the stronger the wood, the heavier it's going to be. And that might cause a problem, since the ship, the purpose of this wooden ship is to carry these cannon, which are very heavy, and then the other things you need. So if the ship itself is too heavy, it's not going to float. And you're probably painfully aware of the many things I don't know, and engineering is a big area in which I can't pretend any expertise, but different kinds of wood have different kinds of density. And so some will float and some won't. So you're going to need, I think, different kinds of wood to balance this out, because as we've seen, the ship is made almost entirely of wood, and it is made of lots of different kinds. So let's just think oak is the one we've mentioned as being sturdy, and any other kinds you might think of that may be lighter or cheaper, and maybe you could use in other areas?
I don't know if it would be too cheap, but pine is also pretty abundant.
Pine is abundant, and you're right, Trevor, pine is cheap, and that's really a good benefit to pine.
Can I ask, why do you think pine's cheaper?
I feel like I've heard that it's a fairly weak wood. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Okay. So you think the price is attached to that measurement of strength?
That's what I would infer.
Okay.
That makes sense.
One of the things when we talk about densities of wood, and especially when you think about the costs associated with them, when Bob says some wood is denser than others, it means literally the cellular structure of the wood is tighter. And so the cause of that, or one of the sort of side effects of that, is that these super denser, cellularly denser woods tend to grow more slowly, right? If you have a lot of like dense cells packed in together in this, to get 1 cubic foot of that wood versus something that's, super airy and lightweight, it takes less time. And so as you think about it kind of that way, and I am not a forestry biologist, so if I'm take my descriptions of cellular density with a grain of salt, but lighter weight woods will tend to grow faster, and so you can generate, and grow a pine tree in a fraction of the time that it takes to grow an oak. But even among oaks, there are varieties within that, some of which are better or worse. There's white oak, there's red oak, there's live oak. And so decisions had to be made about, well, what kind of oak even do you want? What kind of pine do you want? What kind of other woods might you want? And is there differences in the value of where you would want to incorporate this bigger, denser, heavier, but more expensive wood into a ship versus where you might want something that is lighter weight, but maybe more flexible as a result?
Yes. Trevor?
Can I ask why at this time it would be like a factor about how quickly these trees grow, like in the pricing? Because it seems like it was pretty like limitless at this time. Like they could just walk further into the woods and get more.
Yeah, that Fred, I'm talking, it is from a modern standpoint that I'm talking about that. Yeah. But because of some of that, those locations, the pricing and cost of it is in where you have to go to get that stuff as well too, in the early United States.
Actually, that's a really interesting observation too, because one of the appealing things about this area to the British was the abundance of tall trees. And New Hampshire is really created because of the lumber there. And the British Navy, of course, needs lumber, and British merchant ships need lumber. And to build a mast, you need a tall, straight tree. And so the British Crown actually hosied to itself on a tall, straight pine in New Hampshire, and you weren't allowed to cut them because those are kind of reserved for the British Navy. But the windfall, the idea of you get a sudden bonus, really comes from the idea of a tree being knocked over by the wind. And when that happens, it's fair game. So that's the windfall. But yeah, these tall, straight trees. I mean, we saw the masts of the Constitution, which I believe were made by different pieces being put together, but you do need to start with something tall and straight. Yes, Trevor, you had to...
I guess that the sequoia trees are pretty lucky that they landed on the East Coast rather than the West.
Probably, yeah, yeah. I mean, those would have been perfect. Imagine the ships you could build with those masts. Yeah. So, yeah. So certain kinds of trees good for some things, not for others. And the period we're talking about, they weren't so much thinking about how old the trees were. But if you go to some of the, there are a couple of houses in Boston built in the 1600s, and you see their floorboards. And these were trees that were probably 100 or so, more 200 years old at the time they were cut, but they're very wide. And you're not going to see pine or oak trees that big again because they all were cut down in the initial, if you want to build a house, you're going to look for a big tree because then you only need to cut one or two, and then you can plane the wood and get it. So you'll see, bigger floorboards in houses built in the 1600s and houses built in the 1800s. And it was really massive. And there is, again, Carl is way beyond me in what he knows about trees already, but there is dendrochronology where they can tell how old a tree was when it was cut. And I have no idea how they do that. And I'm told it's too complicated for me to understand. So, but yeah, I'm sure one of you could probably figure this out and then tell the rest of us. So yeah, so okay, so wood, and we've realized we need wood, we need oak of different kinds, pine, and I did kind of give you a cheat sheet, the shopping list that that Mr. Humphreys has of how much of different kinds of wood he estimates that a ship like this would take. And okay, so that's good. So aside from wood, what are some of the materials you would need to build a ship like this?
I guess you would
Yes,
need
Sarah.
iron for the like different weaponry and stuff like that.
Yeah, and to hold things together. And where do we get iron?
At this time, probably from Europe.
Okay, so that would mean it would need to be shipped across the ocean. And is there any iron in? These are good questions. We don't need to answer them right now because it is going to be your assignment is going to be to find these things. So yeah, but iron is definitely something that you're going to need for lots of different things on the ship. And also, how do you cut down a tree? What kind of tool might you use?
A saw.
Maybe a saw. Yeah, that's good. Has anyone here ever cut down a tree? Not even a Christmas tree? It's not as easy as it sounds if you just say go cut down a tree. And again, another reason you would need people with some strength and a saw, and you're also going to need a saw to get that log into the kind of planks we saw on the ship or frame it into a keel. Yeah, and so iron for axes and saws. Okay, anything else we can think of that might be required? Yes, Trevor.
I think you said they used copper for parts of the ship.
They did. I mean, we saw the bell, which was made of copper. Anything else?
I saw in those documents that you sent us that there was like a large order for hemp.
Hemp, right? Yeah. What would you think the hemp might have been for?
Was that the rope?
Yes, it was the rope primarily. Trevor, were you going to say rope as well? Yeah. And yeah, so hemp would have mainly been, and then how do you get hemp, which is this plant, and make it into rope, which is a significant thing? There's a tremendous amount of rope aboard. I mean, the ship, you saw the rigging. Now, when it's not doing anything, there's still a tremendous amount of rope up there attached to the masts, but then you need these lines to pull up the sails and lower the sails, and the rope that holds up the anchor. And I'm guessing this is different strength of rope you're going to need for these different tasks. I mean, some of it is lighter than others. And yeah, this is why, Airman Sawaya was talking about learning the ropes, because there's a lot to learn about these different ropes, and each one does a different thing. It takes a while to learn all of that. So you need a lot of this rope, and then you have to make the rope somehow, and hemp is the thing used to make it. And so that's, big order for hemp. Yes, Trevor.
I'd imagine you need a ton of cotton too, or not cotton, but canvas for the sails and the hammocks and everything.
Yeah, you would. Yeah. Yeah, because that, and what's canvas made out of?
I'm not sure.
You see Sarah's Googling it, which is actually what I did earlier. We'll see if we come up with the same answer.
It says it is made out of cotton and linen as well.
Okay. And does everyone know what linen is made from?
Further down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah.
Flax plant.
A flax plant. Yes, that's right. And you'll find in a lot of New England towns a flax pond or things named flax pond because it's a plant that grows typically in marshy areas. And then you take that, you know, cotton, I'm guessing we know that cotton is a plant that you get these little bolls, and less common at this time than flax, because flax is a certain kind of plant that then, and actually it was mainly women who did this work of beating the flax to get the fibers and then taking those fibers and turning them into thread. And this is why women would have a spinning wheel. You would get this mass of stuff and spin the flax into a thread, and then you could weave it into something like canvas, which is linen. You can have fine linen like you could make into clothing, or you can have really heavy linen you would make into canvas, or you could use hemp, or you could use cotton. Okay, good.
I have a question really quick. You said that the iron that we used was, or I think someone proposed that like maybe we got it from the British, but how did that work if we were in conflict with them? Like, was our trade still generally
That's a very
normal,
good
or were there
question.
other like deposits of iron like in the US that they could use?
Okay, I think you raised two very good points. One is that there were other deposits of iron that we have in the United States, because if we're dependent on the British for iron, or we just talked in the tour about 2 wars we had with the British in this period, and how stable is that going to be as a source of supply? I mean, it's an issue we have today with things being outsourced to countries with whom we may not always be in an amicable relationship, and what happens when your supply is at a country you're at war with. So that's, you can see that problem. And another metal that you mentioned earlier, copper. At this point, the other use of copper, of course, is, lining the hull of the ship. And that's a technology the British had adopted in the 1750s or 60s. And when this ship is being built, one of the little things I sent you was the Secretary of the Navy saying, get some copper to line the copper sheets. The problem is no one in the United States knew how to make copper sheets in the 1790s. They had to be purchased from the British. So that's kind of a problem. Iron, we'll see. I mean, one of the assignments you're going to have is to see where in the United States in the 1790s you can find this material. Okay, so we have...
Wait, I'm kind of curious. What all does everybody think they're making out of iron? Like, what do we need the iron for?
For tools.
Okay, tools to actually construct something. All right. That's a multiple time use, right? Like, that's not actually going in. That's not part of the ship. That's just a tool you're creating.
Yeah, Mike, you had a comment?
Yeah, no, I was the one that says tools, but I was also thinking for, I don't know, like binding for the ship.
Like binding, you mean like hold things like nails or whatever you would use to hold it together?
Yeah, correct. And then also for like shaping the ship, I would assume they would use like heat binding for shaping the ship.
What do you mean by that?
I'm thinking like I don't know. It's like almost like they use it as like a shape, or I don't know. Honestly,
no, that's a good question,
yeah,
because trees, what I was just saying, are straight, and here the ship is curved. So how do you do that? How do you take one of these big pieces of wood and bend it so that it's the shape you want? That's
You soak it.
Soak it in what, Rachel or Rick?
I don't know.
I mean, because they've had to do this with the refitting of the ship.
Water,
actually
I would
set-
expect.
Yeah.
And
they-
but they also soak the wood in pitch afterward to make it watertight.
pitch. Okay, so what is pitch?
Sap, really,
Sap,
or like tar.
tar.
Can we step back to the shaping for a second?
Yeah.
Because if you're okay with it, Bob, I'll provide a little cheat sheet on this one. All of the individual planks, like, especially these denser materials we're talking about, like oak and stuff, it won't bend very far before it snaps and cracks, right? The ones, the lighter weight woods with the more open structure to them, cell structure to them, are the ones that are going to bend more. Those are great for things like, masts and spars where you want some flexibility. But the denser stuff that you want to give you those iron sides, right, is that denser wood. But because it's denser, it's not as flexible. So what we actually did, and this is still done today, and they still do this when they're restoring Constitution's timbers today, is they steam each individual plank. So they'll cut a plank to fit into where it needs to replace another one. And they build a long sort of rectangular square box and slide that plank into it. And then they boil water till it turns to steam in another bucket and connect a steam pipe to that box. And they pump steam into the box. And that hot steam, rather than just water, makes the wood much more flexible when it comes out. So you'll see these really, like, literally steaming hot wooden planks coming out of the steam box, and then the woodworkers will rush to get it in place, bend it, and bang it into place before it starts to cool and stiffen up again. You can actually see videos of some of this being done in the modern era during some of the restorations of the ship on some of the blog pages that we've done at the museum, or just, Google Steambox and you'll see other wooden shipbuilders and other similar places doing it. Sorry, that's a giveaway, but I couldn't help myself.
No, that's good. No, that's good. I think I don't think we would have figured that out today. We would have been here through tomorrow trying to figure out how you bend these pieces of wood. Good. Okay. So anything else you can think of that? Yes, Trevor.
Not so much material, but I'm wondering where they got the space to build these, because I can't imagine like the citizens of Boston would be very happy with Boston Harbor having a huge ship taking up shipping lanes.
Well, they would and they wouldn't. As the article there are shipyards in Boston, and Edmund Hart's is the one where they're going to build this one. It's roughly where the Coast Guard station is now. But I think in one of the documents I sent you, the Secretary of the Navy is speculating on building shipyards specifically for the Navy. But you're right, you need space for that. And the problem you're going to have if you want to do this in a city like Boston or like Philadelphia is the space is already taken up by other things. So you're going to have to buy land that's actually costs more in Boston than it would in a place where there's nothing around. It would be cheaper to buy land in the middle of nowhere to do this, but there are a number of things you need in order to have a working shipyard. And so now, having told you there are some things you need, I'm now going to ask you what you think are the things you need aside from the space. Yes, Trevor.
Well, I mean, if you moved away from a more populous area, then you wouldn't have the workers to be in the shipyard.
Right. That's the first thing you need is a workforce. And yeah, there's available land where there aren't any people. And anything else? I mean, that's good. So that's the advantage of having it in a place where there already are people.
What are the other criteria if you're going to build this thing there, right? Like we're putting together this huge thing there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Sarah.
I guess you would also need paint for obviously the ship.
that's good. Yeah, that's true. You would need paint, a lot of it. And the ship's going to continue needing a lot of paint. And so what do you make paint out of? I mean, I don't think that there was a Sherwin-Williams store in Boston in 1797 when they're launching the ship. Oh,
Was it lead paint at that time or was that before?
yeah, no, there is probably lead in it. It's probably one of the ingredients.
Mhm.
You know, the pigment is one thing with the paint, and then you also have some kind of base, whether it's oil or enamel. I mean, whatever the base is, and then that may contain lead. So yeah, so a lot of different stuff goes into paint. Yeah. Okay, what's another? Because as we know, we're going to be building all of these ships with the same materials, but one's going to be built in Boston, one's being built in Philadelphia, one's being built in Baltimore, and then there are others that'll build in different places. So what's one of the issues with that? Yes, Trevor.
Communication. You
Yeah,
need to
that's
have
true.
people that can go from each project to the other.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's another reason you need good plans, which is how we started off, so that everyone knows they're building this same thing. And then what about getting all of this stuff from one place to another, to these different places? That's another critical thing. Okay, well, I think we have a good list of things that we need. And so the next piece of this for you is to see where we can find these things. Okay, so there are 6 of us, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, happily, we have 6 things. Well, 7 if we'll include. Carl, would you say pitch or paint is more important to building the ship?
Well, so that's kind of interesting, and I was going to bring that up. Somebody before mentioned, did somebody mention tar or pitch?
Yes.
Who said that? I
I
can't
think
remember.
it was Ray.
Ray said that. Okay. So, Ed, so Ray's talking about stuff made out of pine trees, right? And tar and pitch, and later on, in the later part of the 1800s, turpentine are all made out of pine trees. But you need to first collect the pine wood, boil it, burn it down till you get that sap, the sap out of the tree. And that boils down to tar, the gooey, like it literally kind of like a petroleum tar. And then you continue to boil that down to get pitch, this even thicker, denser, heavier stuff. And tar and pitch were, as I think Ray may have mentioned, used for sort of waterproofing, not so much over all of the timber, but specifically over the joints that you were connecting, right, to try and get it in there. Paint is as Sarah suggested, possibly lead-based at the time. And lead-based paint, although it tends to develop a little bit later on, is a great alternative, becomes a great alternative to copper because it's providing that, that sort of bug-proof or growth-proof setting. Nothing wants to grow on that material. But at the time, even simple like calcium carbonate whitewash could provide UV protection from rot from the sun, and also could provide defense and a barrier against water and rot. So they're both kind of important, but the paint can be made in a wide variety of places. But this combination of tar and pitch, all these various products made out of pine trees, are what are collectively called naval stores, because they have so many different uses on ships. And an entirely separate industry develops for these products, because they're not just being used in between, on the hull itself, but you're also taking all of that hemp rope and waterproofing that so that it doesn't rot away. Or at least the standing rigging you're doing that with, the stuff that isn't moving and is holding up the masts. That's why you see it colored black, actually. But you got to figure out where you get tar and pitch from, and how you process it into those finished products, and then get it onto the ship. So yeah, that one was super huge at the time.
Yeah. And just thinking of that, when the ship made its world cruise, they knew they were going to be spending a considerable amount of time in the tropics. So when they were in Rio de Janeiro, the captain had the hull painted light gray instead of black, because he knew that the black absorbs heat and the lighter colors reflect it. That way the below decks wouldn't be as unbearable as they might be. So they needed a lot of paint for that. And at this point, the Navy had started having naval supply stations in places like Rio, and there was one in the Mediterranean, and they opened one in Hong Kong and in Honolulu, because this is where naval ships will be stopping, and they're going to need to resupply. I mean, they're going to need to make new sails, they're going to need to replace rope, and they're going to need new paint and other things. So they have, the Navy in the 19th century starts a big supply chain because they have a fleet that's going around the world. So why don't, I was going to assign people to find things. Who wants to look for oak? Either raise your hand or speak up.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Sean. Sean is going to find out where oak is.
And
how about
Sean, as you go in to do that, keep in mind that there were a couple of different kinds of oak that were used in Constitution, in particular white oak, for a lot of the piking, but also live oak. And live oak, which was denser and stronger and heavier, was used in the framing, but it comes from someplace totally different. And there's a really kind of challenge to acquiring that's worth finding out about.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Good. Let's see. How about iron?
I can do that.
Thank you, Ray. Copper?
I'll take copper.
Thank you, Mike. Hemp?
I can do hemp.
Thank you, Sarah.
So as you take a look at the hemp too, keep in mind, if we're making it into rope, right? These are super tall masts, long runs of rope. How are you going to take these, relatively short hemp plants and stretch them out? Like, how do you get rope out of this, as Bob asked?
Yeah.
And do you want me to include, oh wait, sorry, that was canvas. Sorry, never mind.
Well, okay. Did you want to look for canvas? Okay. I'd say pitch, tar, turpentine. So let's see, we have, okay, Trevor. And okay, so let's see, Megan, what would you like to look for?
Whatever.
Well, let's see, we have pine, or we have paint, or we have canvas.
I can do pine.
Okay, good. Is that everyone, or did I miss someone?
Does somebody want to take a stab at sails instead? Because I think
Okay,
that's another
Trevor.
sort of different,
I think, yeah,
fascinating.
okay, so Trevor, why don't you take a look for sails instead of pitch and pine, which is another interesting one.
Yeah, if we're going to create canvas and then turn the canvas into sails, that seems like Bob mentioned the beginning part of it, right? Of kind of turning those fibers into threads, but
Yeah.
that seems like it's still a lot of steps before you get these huge
Yeah.
sails you're hanging up.
Yeah. Okay, so your next step, which you'll start doing now, is looking to see where in the 1790s you could find these things. So we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes and then see how far we get. And then we'll probably carry on next week. Okay? Good.
Take a look. If you look onto the museum's website as well too, and use the search function there, you'll find that we've written a lot about a lot of this different stuff as well. So you might find some answers there.
Yes. I found a lot this morning when I was looking. So.
That's nice to hear.
Excuse me.
Yes, Ray.
I looked up where most of the iron ore occurs in the US, and like 90% of it comes from the big deposits in Michigan near Lake Superior. Did people know about that in the 1700s? Had those mines been found?
I'm going to guess no.
Okay, then I suspect they would have had to trade for it from
Or
other
find it
nations
somewhere
then.
else.
Right. You might also look up a couple different kinds of iron deposits, you know, when you think about like mines and stuff. But look up the term bog, B-O-G, iron.
Bog iron?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm guessing you're not from Saugus.
no, I'm not. But I've read a good deal about the iron ships, and that's how I knew it came from Michigan.
Okay. So how are we doing? What have we found? So Sarah, did you find hemp?
I did. I found some things about hemp. So I guess I'll just start.
Sure.
So what I found is that for most naval purposes, the hemp was actually imported from Great Britain, sometimes Russia. There's Manila hemp, which is from the Philippines as well. And then later also from the United States. America was growing some. In Kentucky, I guess their hemp industry really grew from from 1775 all the way through like the 1790s, where it kind of like exploded there.
Wow.
One company in particular, the Boston Duck Manufactory, which is where actually they got a lot of the canvas and hemp that they used on the USS Constitution, was from there.
Wow.
And they ended up using, the USS needed 120,000 pounds of hemp on the whole creation of the ship. And then going into how it was stretched out, like with such large quantities. So it's like hemp fibers. They were spun into hemp yarn, which is then twisted to make hemp strands, which is then twisted again to make the twine and rope. And they used that mainly because it was really strong and durable and lasted a while.
Wow. Now, where did you find all of this?
The USS Constitution Museum website has a lot of good information on hemp and canvas, but also just from other websites on the internet.
Oh, good. Okay, good job. That's very interesting.
So if you were gonna make like a piece of rope, right? Like how do you twist that stuff together? Like what kind of space do you need to twist this stuff together? Did you get to that?
I didn't get to that, but I would imagine you would need a quite large space, considering how large some of these large ropes would be, obviously, to the masts.
Yeah, even the largest ones are only like, less than a couple feet in diameter, but you want really, really long ones.
Yeah.
And so rope was created by spinning and twisting this stuff together in places that were known as rope walks. And a rope walk is this crazy long building where you set this stuff up to twist it together so that you can make a long enough piece of rope.
Yeah, in my reading, I did hear about a rope walk in Kentucky, and then also in Chicago, I think, or someplace along there, but I wasn't sure what that was, so that clears that up.
Yeah, if you look at a map of Boston from the late 1700s, at the time Constitution was under construction, you'll see rope walks were all over the place. And there's one of them that actually still exists in the Charlestown Navy Yard. It's currently, because they haven't made rope there since the 1970s, it's in the process of being turned into condominiums.
Yeah.
But if you go down to the Navy Yard along Chelsea Street and the 5th Street entrance to the yard, you'll see this just crazy long, low slung skinny brick building that was used to make rope.
Yeah. Yeah, and as Carl said, rope making was an important industry in Boston. You said how much they needed aboard this one ship and with all of the other ships in town. So there was a rope walk that's where the fight began that provokes the Boston Massacre between rope workers and sailors. And then in the 1790s, there's a big fire that starts in one of these rope works in what was then the south end of Boston, now the financial district of Boston. And after that, they moved most of the rope walks to the edge of Boston Common, really where the public garden is now. And then there was another one that extended on Beacon Hill, basically along what's now Pinckney Street, because you needed, as Carl said, a crazy long building. And also because the fiber itself is flammable, and then they're coating it with turpentine. You're essentially making a huge wick, and this is why fire starts, and they don't want to have it. And so the rope walk in the Navy Yard was built, I don't know, was that the 1830s or so, is all granite and very few windows. And that's been one of the reasons with redeveloping it, because essentially there are doors on each end and then not many windows. So it's been a long process of figuring out what to do with a rope walk once you no longer are making rope there. And, so that's interesting. You found a lot about hemp rope and its importance. And so let's see, Trevor, what were you able to find about sales while we're on the fabric still?
So I kind of started by just figuring out how fabric is made in general, because I didn't have any idea how like even a shirt is made. But I guess it's just kind of like the simple principles of weaving. Like, so you have some threads, it would be either the flax or cotton going this way, and then you weave going the other way, and then repeat the process a bunch of times, I guess. And when you have the very like thin fibers, you do it like a billion times, and eventually you have a sail. So to answer the question of where we would get them from in America, I found one story that said that most of the world was making sails out of flax or linen or other like yellowish fabrics, until one like notable World Cup race for sailing ships, where America showed up with a bright white cotton sail and like blew away the rest of the competition and finished in like half the time, and the rest of the world decided, hey, we need to use cotton now. And like the benefit of using the cotton was that the holes in between the weaves, I guess if you want to call them that, is they're so much smaller because you can compact the cotton a lot more than you can with the flax.
Wow, very interesting. Wow. And when we were on the tour of the ship, we saw the sailmakers area, which is way down. Where do you have any sense where, what kind of space you need? Think about the rope walk. What kind of space you need to make a sail?
I didn't get that far, but I assume probably very large as well, unless you just kind of let it fall on top of itself. I'm not sure how the fabric comes out on the other side of the weaving.
Mm-hmm. Well, the loom would have to be pretty big. And then I remember when they were making sails for Constitution's sail in the 1990s, actually it was a sailmaker up in Maine, and he essentially leased the gym of this local high school because he needed a space that big, if I'm remembering this correctly. I always look to see if Carl is shaking his head in disappointment or,
yeah, sometimes that was the case. The sailmaker you're referring to is Nathaniel Wilson, Nat Wilson, who still makes sails up there, although the business has mostly gone to his son. So Trevor, you were talking about how wide a piece you could make doing this, and there are limitations on that, right? Because like Sarah was telling us, you string together these pieces, and if you're doing these tiny threads, they get weaker the wider they go, and there's a limitation as Bob said, to the width of it. So you make what are called panels of these fabrics, and then you need to stitch all of these panels together to create, the big, huge square sails. And when you're actually stitching those panels together, it's not a straight stitch. You're actually carving, let's see if I can do this with my hands. You're actually overlapping them, but then shaping that overlap so that rather than just a flat piece of cloth, you're creating something that has a built-in curve or shape to it so that it can capture the wind. And that means that there's an arc to where, there's sort of an arc to the overlay of the panels, which means that it all has to get laid out on a floor of what's called a sail loft, and then pinned down and temporarily stitched together, right, with an initial stitch. And then you had sailmakers, and again, this is pre-sewing machine days, right? So you had sailmakers who sat on little wooden benches and by hand stitched these panels together. And even once you've done all that though, right, there's not enough strength on the cloth to hang it up in the rigging. So you have to then sew more hemp rope around the edges of every one of these sails, what are known as bolt ropes that are literally stitched into the edge of the sail to give the entire thing a sort of rope frame that gives it the strength to hang up in the rig and also not to, completely blow out when the wind starts to blow against it. And once that's done, then there's still the iron fittings that we were talking about earlier that have to go into like grommets and fittings at the end that you attach the ropes to that are, holding it to the mast. Yeah, sail making is an art. And actually I'd been thinking about it and I should have asked, I've got friends who are sail makers today who do this kind of sail work on these traditional vessels. And one of them is in the process right now of building huge squaresails for a replica sailing ship. And she's been posting to Facebook, these massive, in what amounts to like you said, a gymnasium-like kind of room, pushing these huge pieces of cloth through today, a sewing machine. But doing it by hand was crazy. This guy's just flat stitch and in a roundabout pattern, one panel after the other. And sail lofts were another thing that you needed space for on the waterfront for these guys to do this. And again, in the north end of Boston, one of those is now a restaurant called, appropriately enough, the Sail Loft and Bar was originally a sail loft.
I did not know that.
Yeah, next to Commercial Wharf.
Yeah. Okay, good. If we were meeting in person, we would probably have one of our end of the semester gatherings there. Good.
Good clam chowder.
Yeah. Let's see. Megan, you were looking at pine. Can you tell us where you find pine?
I struggled a little bit to find information, but near the end of the time that we had, I did find this. The Eastern white pine that was used to make the ships like mast, cabinetry, and millwork. It was like abundant in the colonies. Like it wasn't like something that they really had to like import from anywhere. But the longleaf pine that was used to make the ships like beams in the decks, that grew more in the south, and so they had to import that from the south. And then the longleaf pine that they did import to build the USS Constitution, they got it from South Carolina.
Oh, okay, good. So very good. And where did you find this on the?
It was on. It was called the History of Massachusetts blog, which in hindsight, I don't know if it's a blog, if it's 100% reliable, but it's very specific information.
Okay, that's good. Trevor, I didn't ask where you found what you did about the sales.
Where I found it?
Yeah.
So one of the sources was Encyclopedia Britannica.
Okay. So let's see, Ray, can you tell us a little bit about iron? Well, we only have about 3 minutes left, so maybe we should put that off until next week. So Ray, Sean, and Mike, you can tell us, or you can post on our blog. Speaking of blogs, I know Megan and Trevor's posts are 100% reliable so far on the blog. So you can post there, and I'll see you all next week.
Alrighty, sounds good.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor.
Take
This
care.
was really interesting.
You too. Take care. Take care, Carl.
Take it easy, Bob. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.